Southeast Asia is a part of the world home to many nations that are dotted across a multitude of islands. I mean, technically a part of mainland Asia is Southeast Asia too, with countries like Vietnam, Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and a large part of Malaysia. But there's places like Indonesia, the Philippines, and even tiny nations, parts of islands like East Timor and Brunei. However, today we are looking into one tiny island just off the coast of mainland Malaysia, that of course being the nation of Singapore. And yes, I say country. As I went into writing this video, I wasn't too sure if Singapore was even a country, but if it was more a is Hong Kong a part of China kind of situation. Turns out, however, it is not. Singapore is the only place in the world that prides itself on being an island and city-state, meaning Singapore is an island nation, though within its control are many smaller islands and islets. And the main biggest island of Singapore is primarily a city. In fact, the percentage of the Singapore population that lives in urban areas is considered to be 100% of the population. Of course, however, we are not here to really look into the specifics of what Singapore is and isn't. We're here to look at where that name Singapore comes from. However, it wasn't actually always called that. An earlier name for the island was Temasek. This name has first been found in documents dating back to the 14th and 15th century. We aren't too sure where exactly this name comes from, but one idea seems pretty accurate. It's thought this name comes from the same root as the Malay word for lake, Tasik. It's strongly believed that Temasek means a place surrounded by a lake or the sea, which is pretty fitting for Singapore as it's an island surrounded by the sea. So that's why I feel this etymology for Temasek is pretty solid. Soon enough, the name Singapore started to emerge. However, it wasn't the first place to be named Singapore. A Singapola is mentioned in the Jataka Tales, a collection of stories about the previous lives of Buddha, and the village of Chulakio in Vietnam was once called Simhapola when it was the capital of the Hindi Champa kingdom. It was even used as a place in Thailand during the Angkorian Empire. So why were so many places called Singapore, or at least a variation of Singapore? Well, to help with understanding that, we ought to look at what the name Singapore actually means. The name comes from the Sanskrit Simhapuram, which means lion city. You're very lucky this video wasn't called which country is named after lions. This name is a combination of Simha, which means lion. I think it's a coincidence this sounds somewhat like Simba, and Puram, which means city. It's likely this name comes up in the Buddhist world so much as lions play a large role in Buddhism. So why did this island end up with the name Lion City? There's actually a couple stories as to how this happened. Both are somewhat steeped in the world of legends, however. One idea comes from the story of a Sumatran prince named Sang Nila Utama, who was out hunting one day on the island when he saw a mysterious animal in the far off distance. He believed this animal was a lion, and he saw it as a good omen to set up a city where the lion stood, which would eventually become Singapore, though this is debated as lions aren't really known for being native to the island. Yet the second theory, and the theory that helps us explain why the name changed, is thought to be due to the last king of the island changing the name from Temasek to Simhapolam because he wanted the island to have a name related to the wider Sanskrit speaking world, as opposed to the name Temasek, which only meant something to the Malay speaking world. If this was the case, then unfortunately his Sanskrit name of Simapura was translated to Malay as Singapore, and then when the British arrived on the island, the name we now have today, Singapore, was cemented. However, these aren't the only two names that Singapore has gone by. A more notorious one is Soinantu, the Japanese name given to the island was occupied by the Japanese in World War II. This name meant light of the south, which makes sense as Singapore is south to Japan. Once the Japanese surrendered, however, the name quickly disappeared. Even till today, the name is apparently something of a sore subject in Singapore. The most interesting name I found, however, isn't technically a name for the country of Singapore as a whole, but just a name for the biggest island of Singapore that makes up the majority of the nation, this name being Pulau Ujong. This name means island at the end in Malay, which is super fitting as Singapore is quite literally the island at the end of the peninsula of Malaysia. Singapore was suggested by Trey Wisecarver and Alistair Chi over on Patreon, and thanks to their suggestion, they will now be honoured as Name Explain's patron saints of Singapore. If you want to become a Name Explain Patreon saint, then why not support the channel on Patreon? Just $1 and up earns you the chance to suggest a country or geographical location on the Wednesday Patron Saint suggestions post for the next Patron Saint video. And of course, don't forget to pre-order my upcoming book, The Origin of Names, Words and Everything in Between, as it's out in less than a week. It's a celebration of all things etymology and explains the names of things across a huge variety of topics. If you love the channel, then you will love this book. Links to pre-order from Amazon will all be down below. And of course, thank you to all my patrons. These Tuesday videos are able to exist solely because of all the awesome people who support Name Explain financially on Patreon. If you enjoy these videos and want to be a greater part of our Name Explain community, then why not support the channel? Just at $2 a month gets your name here with all these awesome people. Thank you.